actually. The past 2 years have been, for some of you who know, have been extremely hard for me, for people who are closer to me, given what's happening in Ethiopia. And I have come to appreciate the value of friendship, family, networks. So the support that I got from all of you in this time has been extremely valuable. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Right. I don't see the slides, but maybe. Do you see them? I see myself in the screen. Right. So it's a policy talk, but it's a collaboration talk. So I felt like this is a good opportunity to introduce WRI Africa, because as WRI, we've been growing fast, we've been thinking hard. Of course, some of you, again, know very well what we've been up to. But we also have come to learn that the opportunities for collaboration with EFD are quite immense. So that will be my topic, sort of linking to some, basically it's the agenda of policy relevance and action. How can we work together more? If I don't finish my presentation, what I try to do is quite simple here. And it will focus on Africa, even though WRI is quite global and we have a lot of overlap. I think all of us believe that African countries are facing immense challenges to try and transform their economies in this age where they need to focus on resilience, they need to focus on and finding a way of growing in a non-carbon intensive way, and they need to do it inclusively given the challenge that we face in poverty, unemployment of the youth, gender equality, and so on. This is a huge task, and they don't have a lot of time. We do think that this is feasible, and it's the best option, but it's quite demanding, because there are also, again, coming to EFD's model, there are capacity gaps, there are institutional gaps, there are knowledge gaps. So it's going to take a lot of policy experimentation to do this. We don't know the solutions that work. It's going to take a lot of institutional innovation and capacity as well as finance. So collaboration between homegrown local institutions and international regional institutions to find very smart, cost-efficient ways of developing the knowledge infrastructure to support our countries is going to be crucial. We don't have time, so we really have to be innovative on how we work, on how we collaborate. And I propose, hence, that we have an opportunity here for Efd and Wri to also try and do that and bring in more partners. So that's the storyline of my presentation. But let me go back a little bit. Efd annual meeting 2017, when I was the center director in Ethiopia, another amazing conference, I think, because of all of you. And we had a keynote by Kitty, who was the Europe and Africa regional director for WRI. And she was very excited to introduce WRI's data platforms. She saw the opportunity of collaboration, and of course we were already engaging in Ethiopia in this collaborating effort. So I'm not proposing something new. It's been developing. One of the areas that we collaborated, which I will come back later a little bit, is I think something that I'm really proud of, which is starting an annual conference on green growth in Ethiopia. That brought all government, non-government stakeholders to debate tough questions about how the country is doing in its transition. And WRI and EFD also worked on that. And you can see me here between EFD and WRI that time. So Guna, and of course soon after that I also joined WRI. But it's for me it's also a personal journey. Now we have already collaborations going on. We have had collaborations in Ethiopia. We collaborated on water risk assessment maps, and we have been collaborating lightly, nonetheless, on EFD's inclusive green economy capacity building. We are actively collaborating on EFD's initiative to map knowledge gaps for inclusive transition. WRI is supporting it. And now we have even more exciting opportunity to collaborate on the Resilience Adaptation Mainstream Program that I think was talked about during the start of the meeting by the head of Makerere University. But we have, again, bigger opportunities to exploit, I would say. Now, then I have to tell you a little bit about WRI and WRI Africa so that you get into context what I mean. Right, WRI, briefly, a research organization trying to connect evidence and action so that we all have a future that's prosperous and, of course, that we don't cross planetary boundaries. Our mission, quite basic, simple. All of us, I guess all of us have the same vision and mission. What we do, we try to address 7 global challenges. We have active programs in these global challenges: forests, food, water, energy, cities, climate, and ocean. And we look at them in the lens of economics, finance, business, equity, and governance. And what we do, our day-to-day work is, of course, we do research, problem-driven research and analysis. We invest quite heavily in using data for action, for decision, packaging data tools. We do convening at all levels, regional, global, national, to try and connect, to bring decision makers together to use the evidence. And of course, we actively work in technical assistance, including to governments and policy. What we deliver in terms of our outcomes, research is just a means to an end for us. Our outcomes are policy changes, shifts in business strategy, shifts in behavior of individuals and private actors. Also, of course, strengths capacity, and also change in discourse. Framing issues differently is also part of what we believe is relevant. So this is broadly to give you an idea. This is a map of where we are generally. Kind of overlaps with where EFD is in a way. Even though WRI is from the US, now most of the staff are outside the US. So it has been growing quite fast. I think it's now about 2 to 1 outside of the US to US. And Africa is the fastest growing now. We are not new to Africa. We have had many engagements on many issues over the years, even though they were specific, tailored, coming from our programs. You can see we've been working on forest, especially in the Congo Basin, cities in Ethiopia, South Africa, Uganda, and so on. Energy in East Africa, water in Ethiopia and some other countries, food, including as part of the Food and Land Use Coalition that we also co-host, and of course climate, including New Climate Economy, one of our flagship programs. But over the past 2.5, 3 years, and a bit before that, a decision was taken to institutionalize WRI Africa deeper, to be part of the sisterhood, and also to sharpen our strategy. I will try to run faster. Now, when we thought about then, what is our strategy in Africa? What do we do here? How do we grow? Here are some of the foundational ideas that we try to capture. Of course, transformation, but also thinking through what is transformation, economic transformation for African countries. That's key. Inclusion is central to our work. Focus, as you saw, we were a bit spread out, so we wanted also to focus a little bit, go deep in some countries. And a lot that we can, and personally I have been investing a lot on this with my colleagues, is knowing our added value. What is it that we add as WRI to our countries that we work on, and integration and so on. Now, this is our strategic framework. We have 4 pillars of work. Ones that we call vital landscapes, that covers basically our work on forest, food, governance. It is about revamping the rural ecosystem. A second that we call thriving resilient cities. This is anchored on our cities program, which is actually the largest in WRI. And we have sustainable energy transition and access, as well as a 4th pillar that I also lead institutional and economic transformation that includes our climate work, but it's fundamentally about developing capacity, the enabling environment to drive transformation. In terms of focusing now, as you can see in this map, we will go deep in the Congo Basin, where we have years of work, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, and of course we have quite an overlap here with EFD, but also we will continue strategic engagements on some issues in the second-tier countries. For example, in Nigeria and South Africa, we'll deepen our work on climate and just transition. And in Niger, we'll have work on restoration and so on. And there are also sub-basins, for example, the Ruzizi Basin, where we will invest quite heavily in bringing things together. And I want to flag this as an opportunity for impact research, and I'm happy to talk about it. Here are our flagship areas of work. Again, in the interest of the team here looking into how do we work together in research and collaboration. On the vital landscapes, securing forests and local rights, this is going to focus mostly on the Congo Basin. And we have accelerating local restoration. I will talk a bit more about it, but this is leveraging on our work on Africa 100 and food system transformation. On the cities line, resilience, urban resilience, especially urban water resilience, as well as mobility. We have active work on transport and mobility now in Ethiopia, Ghana, Uganda. So we'll deepen that. And on the energy access, on the one hand, we are starting a program to work with countries and also bring countries together to think what is a sustainable energy transition pathway that works for a given country. What kind of data does it take? What kind of analysis do we need? And to try and answer questions like, should X country use its gas, when, and so on? Because the debate there is quite divided. And we also have active work on energy access. And on the institutional and economic transformation, in addition to cross-cutting works that we do on international developments that I will get back to, we have also climate action, active climate action program. Now, why EFD and WRI? Quite briefly, this will be basic to you, but I really want to stress it. We have very aligned missions. It's very clear. And I think also quite complementary missions. And we overlap quite a lot in where we work. That means we can support each other. And I want to stress a little bit about it. This is our impact area map for WRI across our pillars. Whatever outcome we deliver, whether it's policy change, finance, capacity building, the areas that we are targeting in terms of impact are what you see. But I really want to zoom in to the bottom, institutional and economic transformation impact. There you can see we are explicitly saying, as WRI, we want to play a role in shifting the locus of research on African issues, on this space, towards African institutions. As you know, a lot of the research on the issues that we care about on our continent is actually happening outside of Africa. It's led outside of Africa. I don't want to make you feel guilty, but that is true. And that needs to shift, and we want to be part of the solution. We think that's critical for our collective success, and we would like to work again with institutions. So I really want to zoom there. And I think this is really at the heart, at the DNA of EFD, right? Developing institutions, centers in homegrown institutions, university centers. So we want to align here. This is just what I said. Only 4% of global funding to research is actually coming to Africa, and a lot of it is even probably not going to be spent here. This is also very, for us, it comes naturally. Our work, the way we think about our approach, there's the count it, which is about the research data. We have to use that to change, and then we have to scale. And all of them are done in partnerships. So we have no other way of doing our work without partnerships. Now I will, sorry for the long animation. I will not go to the detail here, but the slide here, which I actually a while ago developed when I thought for the first time how do EFD and WRI work is, even though it's linear, and of course the path from knowledge to policy is not linear, it's trying to tell you how specific, rigorous research on specific issues is synthesized, communicated, packaged in policy processes. And organizations could do the thought experiment, where am I in this space? And I think EFD is, maybe a bit to the left of WRI here. And we have a lot of complementary. For us, delivering a policy change is an outcome. For EFD, producing knowledge that informs policy change is an outcome. And of course, if that delivers policy change, really amazing. So there's a lot of complementarity. But EFD does a lot of rigorous, specific research that we don't do, for example. We are trying to synthesize, we are trying to map what the knowledge says and set action agenda. So there's a lot of complementarity here. Again, happy to discuss this deeper. Now, there's, of course, a lot of areas that we can work on, topic-wise. But it's going to boil down to finding entry points for collaboration. Where do we start? How do we go? And as head of partnership for WRI, that's one of the things that I learned. With almost every institution that you meet, there's just exciting ideas, but if you don't find that entry point, you can just be in that conversation stage for a long time. So we have to find entry points, we have to start somewhere. And I will say a few things, and I see 3 areas that I think are very aligned to both of our institutions. The first that I keep anchoring is collaborating in actually building on what EFD has been doing in revamping homegrown hubs of data and knowledge that we could all leverage on. The second is, and Francisco and I had really good discussions about this, is collaboration on impact research and learning. WRI is involved in driving big initiatives together with government, civil society. We think they are really fertile to do exciting impact evaluation research and develop data. And also then, of course, leveraging our data platforms in WRI. And when it comes to the first one, I actually don't want to speak about WRI here. I want to speak about EFD, what EFD has been doing in Ethiopia, and to take it as an example that I was very proud to be part of. We have some practical experience that we could develop hubs of excellence for data and research and dialogue quite fast and quite in a cheap way also, that become nodes of attraction to governments, multilateral banks, academia, and so on. And I think EFD has shown the way on that, and Ethiopia was an example. And I would love if we could try to replicate it in other places together or strengthen. The Ethiopia's country environmental analysis that we did with the World Bank, excellent example on how a multilateral bank can leverage on one of our hubs of knowledge. And of course, it would inform a lot of decisions after that. Mike is here, and he has been involved in all of them. Carbon pricing work that we did for Ethiopia. One of the lessons that we learned was just the study was a tiny bit of it. The convenings that we did, the discussions that we've had with policymakers, the mindset that we try to change by basically telling policymakers, it's to your benefit to explore this, to experiment, to build the capacity, were amazing things that we've done through our center, I think. So we could replicate that. And of course, the annual conference. I think the second annual conference brought 7 ministers, a lot of heads of international organizations, tough debates on whether Ethiopia is making progress, whether it's hitting its target. We were the neutral, trusted host for this kind of dialogue. And that's the kind of investment, again, that we can make. I found this clip in Ethiopian Herald, the country's state daily, and they actually had in their front page. This was actually quite new in Ethiopia, where we said that Ethiopia is not achieving its targets. We need to do more assessment, and they put it in and I got a bit of a hit for this, but this is what it takes to push the dialogue and to actually build the knowledge. I think Mtuwab is here. we also invested quite heavily. This is as ambitious as it gets, to develop the indicator and the data to follow the country's progress on green growth and resilience in an independent way. And I showed you the flagships earlier. Now I'm adding how sort of the cross-cutting work that we will do in our institutional and economic transformation work, and how we are actually trying to support it. And you'll see that a key entry point is, again, this development of knowledge and data hubs. So for us, it's now part of our strategy. And it's also at the center of our climate action work in Africa that's going to integrate now our new climate economy work, RAMP, as well as accelerating climate transformation program. Because this is one of the most exciting opportunities for us, we think, for collaboration with EFD, I will say very few things about this. The Resilience and Adaptation Mainstream Program, I was actually here for a week working with Edward and the Ministry of Finance to try and roll out, find a way of rolling this out. It's a program that was initially, funded by FCDO, and then now we have some funding from the State Department. So we are very excited about it. It's a global program, but with a lot of focus in Africa. It is about developing sort of the knowledge and planning, improving knowledge and planning to mainstream finance, to Ministry of Finance, Planning, Economics, and Government to better align economic development and macro-critical climate change risks, as well as scale up climate finance. So it works on the macro-financial aspect of adaptation and resilience. And it has basically three components to it, or features: capacity building, long-term capacity building, work with universities to change curriculum, to integrate. That's why we have a partner in SOAS here, the Center for Sustainable Finance. They have convened a network of universities to do this, and active delivery of capacity to governments that we will continue to convene. And we'll focus on middle-income countries. This is pretty much sort of the mapping of the capacity-building curriculum work, the active technical assistance work, as well as the connections. We have tried to we have a lot of backing from key players in this. As you can see, in terms of technical partners, we have the multilateral banks and implementers, and we also have knowledge partners, naturally, including EFD. Yeah, this week we had conversations, as you can see, with the Vice Chancellor, Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Academy, and my colleague Nisha, the macro department head for Ministry of Finance, Dr. Sam, as well as Edward, where we actually understood very clearly, the value of the investment that the EFD has made here and how we will leverage for it. So this is, I think, an exciting opportunity for us. And just to mention here, EFD has been, through the network, the rich network of EFD, we have been doing the needs assessment. So EFD has been responsible the needs assessment of governments on the capacity building aspects, which will inform the course material and so on. So it's been quite amazing collaboration, and it will, I think, revamp even more. A bit more than, so that was the first part, how we can work in really anchoring on local hubs of knowledge. The second part, a few words about how we can work on impact research and learning from big flagship initiatives. This is basic, but sort of to remind that we don't have the solutions. All of us are here active, trying to say, to develop the knowledge, the ideas, to bring policies, changes, interventions. But a lot of the ideas that work, we don't know them yet. So we really need to learn and learn and learn and learn, and continuously. This slide is basically trying to make that point. Eventually, change is about convergence of solutions. And for that convergence of solutions to happen, a lot of ideas and lessons need to triangulate among each other. That's when innovation happens. No, it's not linear where you have a certain solution to drive restoration. that brings impact on people and nature. It is different ideas coming from what you learn on what's working and what's not working that actually spur innovation in communities, use, and so on. And that's what we are learning. So we really need to invest collectively on the data that's working and what's not working. Very busy slide, I know. I wish there was a better way of presenting it. The point here is project evaluation is happening. We know that it really provides the kind of knowledge that we want on what works, what doesn't work. Impact evaluation research is happening, but it's so anchored on universities, it's very specific, and it's rarely connected to the moving trends that are being implemented. Universities are designing excellent impact evaluations, but oftentimes from on their own. Connecting with existing initiatives, it happens in our cities and so on, but it's quite rare. What we are proposing is a bit of a hybrid here that has the rigor of impact evaluation, but that's really anchored on big initiatives. What kind of data should we collect about restoration in African countries when now the Africa 100 program is taking shape and big funders are coming in to put millions, if not billions, for the implementation? As WRI, we are part of that conversation. We would like to understand what is the data that we can gather and connect socioeconomic and biophysical so that we keep on learning. So it's not about evaluating a specific initiative. It's not about finding that causality, but actually building knowledge and evidence that informs the theories of change of organizations. Because every organization, whether it's WRI or Nature Conservancy and so on, they have theories of changes. They say, if I do this and do this, impact will happen. But those need to be informed by continuous learning and evidence. That's, I think, what we collectively can produce and support each other. And we think, as WRI Africa, we have a golden opportunity to partner with the Efd and others in this time and age because we are initiating big programs. One of them that I kept mentioning is the Africa 100 program. Over the past 5 years, we've been working with governments to set the ambitions of African countries on how much to restore, but also to help them identify where to restore, which land in Ethiopia is suited for what kind of restoration. We've been doing, for example, in Ethiopia, Restoration Atlas that tells you the maps, restoration opportunity maps, and engages local actors and sets the stage for monitoring. Now, FR 100 is going to go to the next stage where it will be about implementation. It will be about localizing it, and countries need to really deliver, and finance is being raised. So it's a perfect opportunity for research. Why? Because as good as, this is sort of the impact pathways for restoration from a recent paper co-authored by actually one of my colleagues leading the Vital Landscapes pillar. And you can see that the good things are a lot, and the pathways are basically on how restoration can achieve climate, livelihood benefits. But we also know there's a lot of evidence showing that if you don't do if you don't plant the right tree, the right place, for the right purpose, you could actually even sometimes have negative impact. So we really need to be ahead of the game now in understanding the implementation and informing big decisions that are coming up. And I really encourage you, those of you working broadly on forests, but also on livelihood kind of research, to look into this and to propose ideas. Another area, very quickly, how much time do I have now?
Another 12 minutes, including questions.
I will finish within a few minutes. Another area that we're working on is urban water resilience, where we try to connect the urban water service delivery, the utility part, with the resilience part, where essentially, where are the challenges in terms of ensuring that the cities that are growing in Africa have their water services and water coming from sort of the regions, what kind of restoration should happen, what kind of ecosystems and services need to be protected, as well as access. We're doing this in Ethiopia, Rwanda, and South Africa. And it's been going on for 3 years, and the next iteration will be We have identified the areas of change, the areas of experimentation within cities. Now we are rallying to set up a financing mechanism for cities to experiment. Again, another opportunity for research. As cities actually try to engage, to be innovative, then there's going to be a learning value. I'll come to the third one, WRI's data platforms and tools. As some of you know, WRI has invested quite heavily in pulling together biophysical and sometimes socio-ecological data on key resources to try and aid decisions on those resources by stakeholders. So we have big data platforms that are hosted in WRI. It's one of our comparative advantages. We have a big data lab. And what we are asking now is we feel those data sets are not being used in a very contextualized way by countries, by institutions. And also we feel the connectivity with socioeconomic surveys at local level is quite limited so that they can be used for evaluation. So that's why I wanted to highlight them. Some of the data platforms, we have Global Forest Watch. I think it's the largest data platform that tells you the trend of deforestation, fires, and so on globally right now. Aqueduct, it's our water risk, water availability data. Climate Watch, Resource Watch, the most ambitious version that connects different data sets. Energy Access Explorer, that maps energy demand at a granular level, and so on and so on. So please explore these data sets and ideas on how could they help you to do your research. We are very keen, and we have a team in our data lab very interested in actually working with researchers for the usability and access of this data. They are all open source. Just to exemplify the energy access data, we are using it in East Africa, in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, where we map energy demand in a quite granular way, try to understand where are the opportunities for investment in renewables. This is an example from Kenya. Our Global Forest Watch data, it can be very, it can go down to the detail. This is from the Congo Basin, where we could use it to identify hotspots for tree cover loss. That I think could be interesting, again, to link with interventions to see how things are changing with policy change and so on, investment change for researchers. In Ethiopia, we did a water risk mapping assessment. It's the first application of our global data, water data aqueduct to a national level. So this is a 4x4 kilometer resolution data that basically tells you water risk in a given area, taking into consideration demographic dynamics, economic activity, and so on. And what we are trying to do is to get the usability of such data for decisions, for planning, for example, where to push cities, where to put industry, and so on, as well as big irrigation projects and what have you. So we see a lot of value for action, but we also think, again, very interesting resource to layer in research projects. And that's it. Thank you.
How did they say at the show yesterday? Is it working? So, thank you so much, Haile. I kind of feel that you're still the Institutional Development Director of EFD. You're providing so much insights and also a lot of projects to EFD. And just a reminder that this data utilization was something that Kitty pushed so hard 5 years ago. I don't think that we quite picked up on it. So there's so much to learn and to do together with you and with WRI. So for me, truly amazing. Thank you so much. We have questions, and we have always Mike first. That's a tradition.
I don't think it's a tradition, and if it is,
it
needs
is a
to
tradition,
stop.
Mike. Go.
Stop. Okay. Haile, this was a very energetic and inspiring talk. But I want to focus on something you said right at the start, because I think you laid down a really important challenge, and I want to sort of highlight it. the need for, as you put it, dynamic policy experimentation. Now, as I listened to the talk, you made reference to a lot of things that could be contributing to more of that. But I never heard you actually say, we're doing this because it gives us more ability to do dynamic policy experimentation. And I don't need to tell you any number of reasons why financial institutions, governments, and researchers are risk averse. So if you were to draw a line through that whole talk and just highlight some things that we're doing this because they help us get that dynamic policy experimentation happening, and then you advise EFD to do likewise, what would you say?
Do you want me to? Yeah, so that's quite a challenging question. Thank you so much.
Like I said, it applies just as much to here as there.
So this idea of sort of the need for policy experimentation was more evident to me when we did the carbon pricing work in Ethiopia. As you might remember, Mike, there was a lot of questions. Why would a country like Ethiopia actually even consider carbon taxes? And the more we explored that, the more we talked, including to the government officials who were backing this up, we understood that it was about learning how it's done. It was about getting ahead of the game. You don't have to apply carbon pricing now. But Ethiopia knowing how would it work if you were to apply it? Which field are you going to tax? Why are you going to tax livestock and land? And when can you do it? That kind of readiness and the capacity building that comes from those conversations was more valuable than, I think, eventually trying to propose a carbon tax. So that's a good example. Generally, though, my point is, in anything that any organization believes is a good solution and it will work to improve energy access, it will work to increase restoration and so on, still there are gaps in knowledge on what works, what doesn't work, especially when it comes to triggering innovation. Because if we cast back, what we learn is, before we had M-Pesa, we didn't know how M-Pesa would come up. It's just, we can backcast and say this and this and this convergence created it, but we wouldn't know. So my point is, we have no choice but to capture as much data, as much information and research as possible, so that it's out there and people can use it to package the next iteration of solution and experimentation. So it's a general point that I agree that once you try to apply it to a specific project, people could also become uncomfortable because you are telling them you don't have the full set of ideas for what you are trying to change. But it's a necessary point, I think, principle that needs to drive our learning. So that was my point.
Do we have time for one brief question? But there is no question because it's also clear. Heide, I thought this was really amazing, and I must say that I really appreciate all the dialogues we have and the collaborations. It has taken many years to actually establish the collaboration with WRI. It helped a lot that Haileselassie is over there. So this is an idea for any of you that go to international organizations, that you can continue to work with EFD. And I really appreciate also that you brought forward some of those experiences from your time at the EFD Center in Ethiopia, because I still think that we have a lot to learn from that extremely successful period. We had a lot of policy dialogues and a lot of traction, and that in itself also created a lot of funding. Also, so a fantastic policy talk. Let us thank Haileselassie one more time and move on. Thank you. Thank you. And maybe you can, it was very hard to see the slides, so maybe you can share the slides with us, Haile. Would that be possible? Thank you. All right, so we have an announcement first. There is someone who has lost a card to the hotel room. It doesn't have a number or name on it, so this could be an opportunity. I don't know. So with this, I will leave the stage and turn it over to the next chair for for the keynote. And it is the Deputy Director for EFD in Uganda, the EFD MAC, Johnny Mugisha. He was also a professor at the Department of Agricultural Economics. So please.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening I have the pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, who is in the house, and a professor of environment and sustainability at University of Michigan. This is none other than Professor Pam Jagger, a holder of PhD in public policy from Indiana University, with MSc Forest Economics from the University of Alberta. Pamela has made enormous contributions in research and capacity building in the field of environment economics and public policy. Away from the University of Michigan, where she's a professor of environment and sustainability, Pamela has been a research associate professor at the University of North Carolina. She was a research fellow at Leibniz Institute for Economic Research in Germany. And earlier she was a senior research fellow at EFD at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. And earlier than that, she was a visiting professor at Makerere University, and particularly in my Department of Agriculture Economics. This is where she left a footprint. It actually ignited research studies and graduate training in environment and natural resource economics, to an extent that staff capacity was built, to an extent that even some year later, the name of the department was changed to Agriculture and Natural Resource Economics. And this also gave us a strong foundation that enabled us even to join the EFD family as EFD MAC Center. For the 2 years she was with us at Makerere University, graduate students and faculty picked rigorous interest in the field of environment economics and natural resource economics. But also she had previously worked with different institutions globally, including the World Bank, where she was a policy research scholar, the International Food Policy Research Institute, Resource for the Future, and the Center for International Forest Research, among other global institutions. Professor Jagger, an applied political economist, is a global leader in interdisciplinary population and environment research, focusing on the dynamics of poverty and environment interactions in low-income countries. She has emerged as one of the leading researchers of energy transitions, looking at relationships and interactions between energy use, forest and land use, health and livelihoods. Her research program mainly focuses on health consequences of biofuel-based cooking and efficient stoves in Africa. She leads the interdisciplinary Forest Use, Energy and Livestock Lab, which focuses on environment and livelihoods, environmental governance, and energy poverty. Pamela has been a strong pillar for EFD Global Network, contributing in various professional capacities. She's currently a member of the EFD Research Committee, and she's a co-founder of the EFD Women in Environmental Economics for Development, the famous We Need, whose vision is to build a pipeline and enhance capacity of women from the Global South to take on research leadership in environmental economics for poverty alleviation. Widely published in high-impact journals, we have this afternoon the privilege to benefit from what Professor Pam Jagger is about to share with us on lessons from 10 years of household energy access research in East and Southern Africa. Join me to welcome Professor Pam Jagger. Welcome.
Okay, I'm going to try and get a mobile microphone. While I'm doing that, can everyone like stand up and stretch, just so you stay awake? Yeah, can you do that? Great. Okay. Should I turn it off? Maybe. Okay, thank you. I understand you were out late last night, so I have some intelligence. Thank you so much for that really very generous introduction. So I got a Fitbit for Christmas last year, and I learned something interesting about myself, which is that when I teach, I walk like 4,000 steps. So I don't know that I'm going to be able to stand still behind the podium. Okay, are the slides, are they there? Oh, okay, thank you. I've lost a little bit of sleep this week contemplating this IT situation, so, okay. So thanks very much. It's a huge honor to be here, in particular sandwiched between two very big luminaries in the field of environmental economics. So I'm going to try and tell you a little bit about what I've been working on in a very collaborative way for the past 10 years, which is energy access, which has already been described. We've been working in quite a few different places in sub-Saharan Africa, but really have had kind of a deep focus primarily in Southern Africa, so really working a lot extensively in Malawi and in Zambia. So I'll tell you a little bit about that as we go along. Okay, so like Haile, I'm going to tell you what I want you to remember from my talk. It's super, oh. Good. Hello? No. Okay. So. Are we on? We're on. Okay. All right. So these are the 5 things I want you to remember. So one, and this was mentioned, I think, when Mark made his introduction to the SETI collaborative, the energy transition is not linear. So there's a lot written about energy transitions. Almost all of it is written about energy transitions in high-income countries. We don't have good theory of how things are transitioning here on the African continent. But what I will confirm for you through the course of my talk is that it definitely is nonlinear. And a lot of our policies and practices kind of assume that it is linear. So we need to be thinking about that. I'm going to show you some of the work that we've done that confirms that the poorest households are also those that are energy poor. That may seem very obvious to you, but it's really worth giving a little bit of thought to how we measure and operationalize and classify who is among the poorest, And then also it's very important, as I think you'll see, that we come up with policies and programs and strategies that can specifically target those populations because they are missing out on the energy transition in a very, very big way. So some of my points are going to overlap with things that Haile raised. We really don't know very much about implementation, and there's a whole field called implementation science, which is used in the field of public health. And I think we, some of us that are interested in doing this kind of work, maybe have a little bit of an obligation to start thinking about the actual science of implementation and scaling, because as you'll see, we've invested a lot of money in some things that I believe are totally infeasible to scale. So we need to give a little bit more thought to that. Along those lines, I'm going to give you a little bit of a warning to be wary of what I call false idols, and I'll elaborate on that point in just a little bit. And then I can't emphasize enough the value that I place on having worked, as was mentioned, I lived in Uganda for some time. I worked here for a period of about 15 years, and I've made a similar sort of investment in Malawi, and I just can't emphasize enough how sort of foundational those experiences have been to the way that I think about things, to the richness of my collaborations, and just to also my ability to actually meaningfully engage in the policy process, which is a high priority for me, and I think probably a high priority for a lot of EFD folks. Okay. So this is just very briefly by way of background, because I know not everyone is an energy transition scholar. So Africa, as we've already heard a little bit about, is in the early stages of an energy transition. Whether it will be sustainable, I think, remains to be seen, and is, we should think about what role we can play in trying to contribute to that aspiration of having a sustainable energy transition. The numbers in terms of electricity access and lack of access to clean cooking facilities are not very optimistic, and actually have been negatively impacted by the pandemic. So the International Energy Institute has actually documented a sort of backsliding in energy access, primarily because people that were paying for things are no longer able to pay for them. So we've had a little bit of a backslide after quite a bit of progress.
Sorry. If you stand there, the rest of the world can see you.
Oh.
If you go walk around, they can. Is it all right?
It is, okay. All right, I'm gonna make Gunnar happy, and the rest of the world, whoever they are. Okay, so the other thing that we should think about is that given the population dynamics on the continent, the absolute number of people that are going to be facing a challenge for energy access is actually projected to increase through 2050. So there's really a lot of sort of urgency for us to get working on this problem. Okay. The reasons that we need to do this are numerous. One is that there's tremendous health impact or health burden associated with, in particular, cooking with biomass. This is well documented by our colleagues in public health. In several African countries, exposure to household air pollution from cooking is actually the largest risk factor for morbidity and mortality. So ahead of undernutrition and ahead of road accidents and ahead of all of those things. In addition, we of course would be concerned about the environmental impact of continued heavy reliance on biomass fuels. We worry about the climate impact of all of the combustion that's associated with those biomass fuels. And then there's a whole host of livelihood-related issues that the people in this room are very familiar with, that are everything from time use to people having a disproportionate share of their expenditures going towards energy, et cetera. So we have a lot of good reasons that we should be trying to tackle this problem. Okay, so I want to just say a little bit about who has guided my thinking on this topic, because it's sort of progressed over the past 25, let's say 25 years. And I'm gonna go all the way back, and this is a little bit of a shout out to Vic. Where's Vic? There's Vic. Okay, he'll remember the Value of Trees project, which was a very large collaborative research project. It was a collaboration between the University of Alberta and the University of Zimbabwe. And I will take to my grave that it was the most collaborative, productive, interesting project to be involved with. So that provided me with an opportunity to spend almost a year in Zimbabwe. I spent half the year living in a rural setting, and I learned a lot about what the value of trees are to people. And it turns out that energy is one of the biggest, and in most cases the biggest, good that people are getting out of forests and woodlands. I then went on to have an opportunity to work with a global network that was convened by the Center for International Forestry Research, where we did a very large global study trying to document throughout the global south just exactly what the contribution of forests was to people's livelihoods by trying to assign values to all of these things that are typically not marketed, right? So everything from fuel wood to medicines to game meat, et cetera. And one of the big findings that emerged out of that is that not only in Africa, but everywhere in the global south, wood fuels are the major thing that people are getting from forests, and of course have this tremendous service component to them, which it provides the cooking fuel in the household. So that was, my very natural resource economics-y introduction to this topic. I then had an opportunity through some National Institutes of Health opportunities that emerged right around 2010, 2011. The public health community discovered indoor air pollution as a problem, although of course it's not a new thing, but they really got kind of interested in it and decided to build what's called a cross-institute program at the National Institutes of Health. So there were some really neat interdisciplinary funding opportunities that allowed me to get some sort of basic training in public health related issues, but also interact with a lot of environmental engineers and exposure scientists, and so really to learn a lot about that sort of aspect of this problem. So that was extremely informative and really interesting also because it was almost like they thought that they had discovered this issue that people cook with biomass, and it just emerged, but we of course had known this for quite some time. The SETI network has been, of course, an amazing resource in terms of forming my thinking about how to do research on this topic. Some of the things that I have sort of absorbed through lots and lots of chats with people in that network include the importance of evaluation research, and I'll really credit Subrendu with driving home the point that you don't do an evaluation, go back a year later, write your paper, and then call it done. He's really emphasized to me the value of that sort of long view in terms of thinking about how to evaluate things. Thinking about both demand and supply side factors, so that sounds very obvious, but a lot of the research on household energy has given very little attention to the supply side of both cooking technologies and fuels, so that's another area that we've built some capacity in. And then also SETI has been good at saying, let's worry about the health problems, but let's also not forget about all of these other things that are associated with this heavy reliance on wood fuels, and let's make sure we consider those co-benefits and trade-offs when we're doing this kind of work. And then finally, I've had the opportunity to lead a big research program. I think it's been an opportunity. It's been a lot of work, and it was really hard during the pandemic. But we have a large collaborative. It's both a research and a training project that's funded by the National Science Foundation. And it's given us the opportunity to do a series of impact evaluation studies with actually a lot of flexibility, which I think is probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So that's been really exciting. I have a huge list of collaborators that range from people that I've known for a very long time that are faculty and researchers at African universities. And then, of course, I've had the opportunity to work with lots of students and postdocs over the years. So I'm going to do, I think this is weird to acknowledge all of those people in the middle of the talk, but anyway, here they are. And there's even more of them. So the kind of work that we have been doing is, there's no I in this kind of work. And I think I have one singly authored paper because somebody told me once that I had to have a single authored paper. That's the only reason I have a single authored paper. So there's, this work is collaborative by design, and I think that's what makes it so exciting and rewarding. Okay, so what are the questions that we've tackled? So a question that emerged for me after years of working in Western Uganda and seeing just unbelievable rates of deforestation was, holy cow, like all of this agriculture-led deforestation, how is it influencing access to household energy? Like, are people using less energy than they did prior to the deforestation? Are they using different kinds of energy? Like, what sort of constraint is this putting on people? And, you know, the old school narrative is that actually it's the people who are using the firewood for cooking that are causing the deforestation. That's almost categorically across this continent untrue. So we had the chance to do some household level panel surveys in a long time ago, about 10, 15 years ago. And we had the capacity to merge that with some spatial data on land use, land cover change. So we were able to put together this very, very rich data on people's fuel wood consumption. And this very rich data, you know, this was just as the sort of fine scale land use, land cover change was emerging and accessible. We're able to put those two things together and learn some interesting things, which I'll elaborate in just a few minutes. We've done several studies where we've tried to understand the factors that influence adoption of clean cooking technologies. So I'll talk to you a little bit about LPG and biomass pellets. And then we've also done some studies that are more focused on sort of more traditional improved cook stoves that are focused on reducing fuel wood consumption. As I've already said, a very big interest for me is whether these interventions are hitting the full income spectrum. So I'll tell you what we've learned about that. And then just towards the end, I'll say a few things about these issues, which I think are so interesting. Like, should we be trying to leapfrog improve biomass stoves and just go straight to LPG? Is that the best strategy for Africa? Related, do we focus on only clean technologies? Is there some benefit from using things that are cleaner than the baseline technologies? And then just thinking about the importance of really understanding these multiple outcomes. Okay, I need to stop and drink some water. And I have realized that it's really hard for you to see what's on the slides, so I'm just going to describe it and you'll have to believe me. So this is the story of deforestation in Western Uganda. I know some of you had a trip out that way. I think, Joe, you would have gone right through this area. So basically anything that's not that beigey color on the map is some sort of deforestation or forest degradation. It really, you know, it was a very formative experience to witness this transpire over a couple of year period. What we learned about what happens with people's access to biomass fuels in the wake of that kind of deforestation is that they start doing two things. One is that they still use the same quantity of fuels for cooking. It's almost completely constant. So they're doing some sort of substitution, and what they're substituting with is either crop residues. So this is an area where there's some maize grown, and there are a few other things that can be used as a cooking fuel, or they're getting what I would call like inferior fuel wood from non-forest landscapes. So they're really sort of scavenging the landscape, in some cases cutting down green trees and actually using that for firewood. So that has some interesting implications, which I'll tell you about in just a minute. But I want to just tell you that, so we did this work and found that there were these sort of transitions occurring in terms of people's access to high quality biomass. We looked at this on national scale using the Integrated Household Survey data from Malawi and combining it again with like land cover land use change data. And what we were able to see there was basically confirming this trend that when there's high levels of deforestation and forest degradation, it forces people to either purchase firewood or shift the sort of portfolio of biomass fuels that they're using. So who cares? If people are using still the same quantity of biomass fuel, why should we be worried about that? Well, it turns out that there's actually some measurable statistical additional health burden attached to using these lower quality biomass fuels. And we've been able to show that the prevalence of acute lower respiratory infection is higher for children under 5 in Uganda when the household is using more of these inferior quality biomass fuels. And in Malawi, we have found similar results when households are using crop residues or when households are forced to use, smaller, greener, again, sort of inferior wood fuels, that increases the likelihood of them having some respiratory infection-related health burden. So that's a thing that we've been able to document. What that points to is that, well, 2 things for me. One is that, it's really interesting to collect data that's very rich in terms of information about energy, also has a health component to it, and it also is geo-referenced. So it gives you the opportunity to sort of put together all these pieces of information. The other thing is important for policy, and as I started to think about this and I started to learn a little bit about where household energy programs were being rolled out, I was starting to realize that, oh my goodness, people are rolling out programs in places where, deforestation is not a major issue, and they're not rolling out programs in places where deforestation is happening. So it was sort of a message to policymakers to be taking this deforestation variable into account. And again, it seems so intuitive, but that's not what we observed when we did sort of a survey of what was going on in both Uganda and Malawi. Okay, so I'm gonna make a quick transition here, and I'm just gonna let you know that we have done some empirical work to try and understand or confirm that poverty and energy poverty are highly covariate. And so we've been able to confirm that, and we've thought about who is poor in a variety of different ways. So giving some consideration to income, thinking about asset poverty, thinking about food security status, and then also thinking about labor constraints, because labor is such a huge part of accessing biomass. So in addition to thinking about poverty in these sort of multiple dimensions, we've tried to really document and understand what does energy poverty look like. And of course, we know that the ultra poor, or people that are poor relative to one of these definitions, are far less likely to have access to electricity. They're far more likely to have no source of lighting at all in their household. And I mean no, like not a flashlight, not a solar panel, nothing. We also know that they are less likely to have any sort of improved firewood stove, and they're less likely to have charcoal stoves. So those are sort of interesting bits of information that we can think about when we're trying to design policies and programs and thinking about, a population for whom some of these policies and programs may have a larger marginal impact because they're starting from such a low baseline condition. Okay, so that brings me to the point at which I started to get really interested in the program evaluation dimensions of energy access projects that were going on. So, of course, adoption is a very interesting question. Who adopts? And we want to know if that adoption is observed across an entire population or if there are particular groups who are advantaged. And then we're also interested, of course, in trying to measure the impacts. And so at various times in various studies, we've looked at this, what I think people like Mark and Subrandu will consider a fairly standard set of things that you would collect data on. Fuel wood collection time, expenditures on fuel, the quantity of biomass fuels that are being used. I've collaborated with people in the public health and environmental engineering field and have learned a lot about how to actually measure the air pollution that people are exposed to, both within their homes and just in their general environments. And then we've done some studies that have had health burden components to them. I just want to acknowledge this lady in the photo. So she was informed that we were in her neighborhood because we were interested in improved cooking technologies, and she got really, really excited could we please come to her kitchen and see her improved stove. So what do you notice in that photo? What's she cooking on? She's cooking on the 3-stone fire. The improved stove is the thing in the background that she's sticking her hand in. So she actually has an improved stove in her kitchen, but she doesn't use it. So this is part of the story. She told us it was very effective for resting, like for putting the pots on when she was done cooking on the traditional technology. So these are the stories that play out in our data. Okay, so I'm going to try to summarize, and I was telling Mike and Vic at lunch, this is the first time I've tried to come up with sort of the story of these evaluations that we've done over the past several years. So there are five evaluation studies that I'm going to try and synthesize what we've learned from them. So 3 of them are focused on clean fuels. One is LPG in Rwanda. We have a natural experiment where we were able to track the progression of that over a 5-year period. The other is biomass pellets and gasifier cook stoves, and I have a few words to say about that, which I'll just hold for a minute. And then we've also looked at pellet stoves in Zambia, so just stay tuned. So one of those studies was an RCT, one is a quasi-experiment. And then we've done 2 evaluations focused on improved biomass stoves. The thing I want to draw your attention to, I want you to look down the far right-hand column if you can read those numbers. So the market-based LPG effort in Rwanda has yielded about an estimated 330 LPG users as of the latest data. These 2 biomass pellet stories that I'm going to tell you a little bit about. These are organizations that were founded by expatriates who were, oh my God, they raised combined $25 million, these 2 organizations. Charismatic leaders, good connections with donors, including Swedish SIDA, yep. $25 million. After 10 years of operation, they have a total of 9,000 customers combined. If you want to talk about scale, this is the opposite of bringing something to scale. So that's one of the false idol stories of the work that we've been doing. I feel mildly embarrassed at times that I was involved in evaluations of these 2 organizations. We've got an evaluation that focuses on the EcoZoom. That's an improved charcoal stove that was distributed. Best estimates are to about 20,000 customers in urban Zambia. And then the real story in terms of scale if you will, and I'm going to argue impact, is this locally produced stove in Malawi that has been distributed to over 2 million households. That means roughly 1 in 5 Malawian households has one of these stoves. So I just want you to keep those numbers in mind as we go. Okay, these are the two biomass pellet company, social enterprises is what they call themselves. So Inyenyeri was founded in Rwanda. Supamoto operates in Zambia. So the story of Inyenyeri is actually very tragic. They ran for about 10 years, and then the company folded because I believe all of the funders and the donors started looking at these numbers and saying, holy cow, like we've given you so much money over the course of this past 10-year period, and you have nothing to show for it. And I'll explain a little bit about why I think they were not fully successful. Supamoto is basically doing the same thing. They have a single factory in Zambia. They produce biomass pellets, primarily using offcuts from sawmills. And they're selling very expensive imported stoves to customers, primarily fairly wealthy customers in the cities in Zambia. Okay. So what have we learned about clean cooking solutions? So in terms of adoption, we've learned that without sort of a clear targeting mechanism focused on the full income spectrum, or let's just say the full spectrum of households in a particular population, then these clean cooking options, LPG especially, biomass pellets, depending on the targeting mechanism that's used, it's primarily the wealthy households that are benefiting. Irrespective of whether it's LPG or biomass pellets, in our experience, take-up is very low, even with a lot of effort. I've heard people say that all impact evaluation studies have 30% take-up. That is kind of our experience, or on average have a 30% take-up. Another thing that we've learned and is being confirmed by pretty much every other energy access study that's going on in Africa right now is that despite the aspirations of the public health community, really people do not stop using their old technologies and fuels. And we've got some really robust data from several different studies that show this. Okay, and then the other sort of sad story, at least in the case of the biomass pellets, is that the average time that these stoves get used with any level of intensity is 2 to 3 months, and then the usage just completely drops off. And so, if you're working on sustainable energy transitions, there are some really important behavioral issues that I think the people in this room are well placed to be tackling. A few other things that we've learned, and I think that these findings are consistent with some of the work that others in the room have done. Households that make fairly large expenditures on hygiene-related things, so they buy a lot of soap, they buy a lot of beauty products, things like that, cleaning products, they're much more likely to adopt clean cooking technologies. Having some baseline awareness of the health burden of cooking with biomass makes you more likely to adopt. The peer effects are tremendous, so if you're talking to people who are using these stoves and if they like them, then that can have a very positive impact. And then we've also learned that the supply side factors in terms of making sure that you can get stoves to people in a timely fashion, that you can repair them if they break down, and on the pellet side of things, if you can guarantee that people are going to have an actual legitimate supply of these biomass pellets to burn in gasifiers, then you're okay. But if any of those things break down, then you're in very big trouble. People give up and they go back to what they were using before. In terms of impacts, so we do see observable reductions in carbon monoxide exposures. Most of the clean cooking studies that we've done have been in urban settings where charcoal is the baseline fuel. So we would expect to see those reductions, and we actually do see measurable reductions. The next sort of link in the causal chain is to think about whether that translates into health impacts. We see some reductions in blood pressure, and the other health impact that we've tracked information on is burns. And a lot of these gasifier stoves are sort of insulated, and so the likelihood of having a major burn is lower. And then we do see reductions in charcoal expenditures, which is of course what you would expect in charcoal use, and some evidence of reductions in time spent cooking. So if you adopt and if you're using these things, they have these impacts. Okay, this is a very simple bar graph, and what it's trying to tell you, so the blue section, it's income quintiles from top to bottom. So the top one is the highest income quintile. And the blue section of those bars is charcoal use. So if you look just at that top bar, what that tells you is that 17% of the study population has adopted LPG, but that they're using, so then this is like the share of cooking. Sorry, it's not 17% has adopted LPG. 17% of their cooking is done with LPG. So even if you have a clean cooking technology in your household, you're still by far using this baseline fuel that you have that you started with. The other thing this graphic tells you is that it's really the wealthier households who are intensively, or at least most intensively, using LPG. The gray bars, so just to the left of the green, this is cooking with biomass pellets, and the company that we worked with in Rwanda, the one that's gone out of business, they had a very sharp focus on trying to make sure that their product was accessible to the poorest of the poor and anyone else who wanted it. So they did a good job of that. Okay, so just again, to come back to the supply side issue, and I think this is a very big challenge, and COVID has really sort of illuminated how much of a challenge it is to be relying on imported stoves, in the case of cooking energy, as the way that you're going to build your energy transition. There are all sorts of delays with shipping. There are all sorts of delays with duties and taxes, and being able to pay those duties and taxes. There are production delays. Most of these stoves are produced in China, and of course, the supply chain issues coming out of China are, continuing to be a major challenge. And then I'll say, from the consumer perspective, a lot of these clean cooking social enterprises start with a particular technology. They promote stove A, and they go out to their consumers and they say, this is the latest, this is the greatest, this thing is gonna change your life. And then 6 months later, they decide that there's something that's even better. And so this is very challenging in terms of managing the messaging to the customers that you're working with. And it's something that has come up in our study in Rwanda in particular, that people really didn't like the sort of, here's the great thing that you should be using, and then, but now we're gonna take it away and you should use this other great thing. Producing pellets, so this is where, like, those of you who are into the green economy, bioeconomy story, sustainably produced pellets made within country should be something that's really exciting. There are all sorts of complexities associated with this. Everything from the pelletizing equipment, which, sorry, Sweden, has to be imported from Sweden, and apparently the only people who can repair pelletizing equipment have to be imported from Sweden as well. So, the pellet factory breaks down. There are issues with feedstock supply. You have to figure out how to get all of the biomass into the factory, and then you have to turn around and get the biomass out of the factory. So there's, it's like building a supply chain is really, really, really hard. And the thing about LPG is there's an existing infrastructure for that, right? Like gas stations are a very logical infrastructure. Okay, I think how much time do I have left? Probably not a lot. 15. Oh, okay, great. Okay, so I'll just say a few things about the EcoZoom stove, which we evaluated in Zambia. It's the blue stove in the picture. This is an improved charcoal stove. We saw very high take-up within our study population. They were offered a fairly significant subsidy. So this is a $35 stove. People were given a voucher for a $20 discount. So they were able to purchase the stove for $15, which in Lusaka is like, it's kind of a reasonable amount of money. Hang on, drink some more water. When we went back, 2 years after we collected our baseline data, only 50% of the people who had adopted the stove were still using it. So tremendous erosion in terms of the number of customers or number of people that are using these stoves. For those that did continue to use it, so the sort of treatment on the treatment estimate, the main impact that we find is that they save roughly they reduce their charcoal consumption by roughly 1 kilogram per day. This is actually a very significant reduction. It represents about 35% of their total charcoal consumption over the course of a year. So there's some pretty big benefits associated with using this stove. In terms of the exposure reductions, so thinking about whether they had a reduction in their carbon monoxide exposure, we didn't find any evidence of that. Okay, so now I'm gonna just briefly tell you about what I think is maybe the most interesting story that we have from the work that we've been doing over the past few years. So most of you are probably aware that Malawi is a very poor country, and it really is. I mean, when I talk with other people from other African countries who go to Malawi, like when Ugandans go to Malawi, they take note that it is really, it's kind of a different place. So, you know, as I've already told you, poverty and energy poverty move together, so there's lots of scope there for making change. Malawi has had kind of a very grassroots, and I would say ambitious and progressive approach to trying to address the energy access issue. One of the things that they've done, they have a very successful social cash transfer program. It's an unconditional cash transfer program. It operates like most of the programs do in sub-Saharan Africa. So roughly 40 countries in Africa have exactly the same type of program. I hope you all know what a social cash transfer program is, right? It's like basically a cash payment to households, typically on a monthly basis for a period of about 2 to 3 years. In Malawi, it's the equivalent of about $4 per month. So that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but for ultra poor households, it has a very large impact. So something that's interesting about social cash transfer programs is a lot of effort goes into targeting who the population is that should receive these cash payments. So tremendous effort goes into that, but then there's very little is done with that information apart from just getting the cash transfer to the households. No, we're not working. Okay. Hello? Maybe you should stretch. I don't know. What should we do? Oh. Hello? Okay, great. By the way, Subrendu, I just want you to know that Edwin Muchapandwa predicted that you would be pacing in the back during my talk. And you are doing exactly what he predicted. Edwin, you called it. Okay, as I was saying, so Malawi's got this great program. Lots of countries have these programs. Malawi was the first country to say, hey, we know who all the ultra-poor people are. They need an energy access solution. How about we just leverage all of that work that we've done to figure out who these people are and deliver the energy intervention to the ultra-poor households in that way. So what they did, so how it works in Malawi is the money truck goes out to the village, like literally, the money truck goes to the village, people queue up, they get their cash payment, and what Malawi did was they also gave people a voucher for a free improved cook stove. So people had the opportunity at that point. They could say, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want your cook stove. Or they could accept the cook stove and take it home, and then they could do whatever they wanted with it. They could use it, they could plant flowers in it, they could do whatever they wanted. But so this was the sort of distribution mechanism that was used to get a very large number of these improved cook stoves out to the ultra-poor population. As I've already said, we have reasons to think that the marginal impact of getting improved cooking technologies to ultra-poor populations may be bigger than just for the general population. And it turns out, it's not that they're bigger, it's that they're different, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so I think I've told you, so this is just a little bit about who is classified as ultra-poor in Malawi. So this is how they do the targeting. And one of the really sort of critical dimensions of this is that these households are highly food insecure. So they either eat one meal a day, cook one meal a day, or sometimes they don't cook at all. There's an asset criteria, so having no valuable assets. They often rely on assistance from other people in the community. They're not receiving any other, at least Government of Malawi assistance, and these households are typically labor constrained, which of course if you're tasked with going out to collect fuel wood, being labor constrained is a particular issue. So this is the intervention stove. It's made by local production groups. It really, literally, it looks like a clay flower pot with a window in it. It's been evaluated by the environmental engineers. My research group has done a little bit of work on this as well. The estimated benefits from using this stove, if you use it consistently and correctly, are that it can reduce your fuel wood consumption by about 35%, and then it can also reduce, of course, by extension, your carbon monoxide and particulate matter exposure. So it has some modest benefits. Okay, hang on. Aaron, do you recognize those guys? This is what you see when you're going into Lilongwe in the mornings, carrying firewood. Okay, so we asked these questions. What share of these ultra-poor households accepted the free stove? And then what was the impact? If people took the stoves, what was the impact on time spent collecting firewood, time spent cooking, quantity of fuel wood used, and the meals cooked in the households? This is a quasi-experimental design. We have a control group. We actually collected 4 rounds of data over a 5-year time span. And in addition to the ultra-poor population, we did a very large, like to thousands of households, what we called a rapid survey, to try and assess what the spillover effect of this program was, with the hypothesis being that other people in the community may see that there are all of these stoves that have come into the community and want to buy them. So we looked at that. Okay, I'm almost done. Okay, so almost 90% of the ultra-poor households that were offered this stove accepted it. This is compared with 2% of households in our control group that took up the stove when we went back to do our end-line data collection. So it really served the function of getting a large number of stoves out in a short period of time. I should have told you already that this, the work and the evaluation is a collaboration with the Government of Malawi. I think that's very important. United Purpose was the implementing partner. They have a very long and deep history of rolling out programs on behalf of the government in Malawi. But so here's the kind of sad story. So we had this very high take-up. Over time, the use of those stoves declined. And we just went back for our final round of data collection. So declined from, was 70% in 2018, down to roughly 50% in 2019, and on our return was all the way down to 25%. Some of that is just the lifespan of these stoves is exceeded, or the stoves broke. They're not extremely robust. Okay, what did we find in terms of impacts? So we found declines, but not statistically significant, in fuel wood collection time. We found increases in cooking time. Let's just park that one. We didn't find changes. We found modest increases in the quantity of fuel used. The big thing that we found, highly statistically significant and robust after we've just gone back in 2022, and for the households that are still using those stoves, these households on average over a 3-day period, so out of 9 meals, they cook on average 2.5 meals more than they were in the absence of having the stove in their household. So to us, that means that people are able to do more with the limited resources that they have, and it's enhancing their food security because there's no salad in Malawi. All meals are cooked, so they're eating more frequently. We also found in the broader population evidence of a 12% spillover effect. So these stoves went out to 10% of households within a community, and on average, an additional 12% purchased stoves. So this program pushed stoves out to 20% of households within a given community. The overall scope of the initial round of the program was to reach 100,000 households. So obviously, if you believe our numbers, then they would have reached about $220,000 with this investment. It was done on a shoestring budget, so when I think about the biomass pellet story, it's a little bit heart-wrenching. Yeah, so that's the story of Malawi. All right, so I think I must be almost out of time. So I'm just gonna tell you, rather than rehashing what I've already said, let me just come directly to where I think we should go in the future. And you know, a lot of similarities with some of the things that Haile had to say. So one thing I'll just point out is that I think that household energy access was kind of the purview of forestry and natural resource management until about 10 or 15 years ago. And now the public health community and the engineering community is like really, really interested in this topic, and they're very dogmatic about it. So I think we have an important kind of mediating role to play in terms of not only looking at clean cooking options. I think we for sure need to keep studying clean cooking options, but we also need to be able to understand how we can move the needle by getting improved cooking technologies into people's households. So the countervail from those two communities is very much, let's get people using LPG or induction stoves or a variety of other things. I also think that it's interesting, one of the things I find most compelling about this story in Malawi is that it really is a success story for energy access for the ultra poor. And you know, a lot of studies are showing that it's really the richest households who are benefiting from these investments that we're making. So we need some more creativity and strategy regarding how to reach everyone. I think this issue of scale, as I've already mentioned, and Haile mentioned several times, like we cannot have these sort of boutique-y efforts that are reaching, after 10 years, only 4,000 households. I think it's just really irresponsible and maybe part of our job to be making that point. I'm worried because as the price of carbon goes up, a lot of these cook stove projects rely on carbon financing as part of their sort of internal funding mechanism. And I worry I'm starting to see it in Malawi, and I'm sure it's happening elsewhere. I worry that there's going to be a lot of private sector, almost like, remember when we talked about carbon cowboys? Like, I'm a little bit worried that that's going to be coming down the pipeline in the context of household energy. So I think we need to do a little bit of thinking about public versus private, or maybe versus is not the right way to frame it, but I'm really coming around to the idea that government engagement is absolutely critical, and part of that comes out of having watched these two biomass pellet firms in particular operate almost fully in a vacuum in terms of their level of engagement with policymakers in country. And then I think we have work to do thinking about what the right framing is for the energy transition that's going to happen here. And I don't know what it is, but I think trying to figure out what we need to be thinking about to support a sustainable energy transition is really important. And I'm not sure that we're going to get what we need in terms of a theoretical framework and guiding principles from studying this sort of heavily European and US oriented energy transitions literature. So I think, so I have to really acknowledge all the funders and collaborators that have worked over the years with us, and then those are my 5 things I wanted you to remember. Okay.
Thank you so much. Another round of applause. A few questions? 1, 2, 3, yes? Don't know. Yeah, there's another mic, Fred. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. It's a very nice overview of what is happening over the last few decades on household energy consumption. When you're talking about transition to the cleaner fuel for cooking, so there are several factors might be working at the same time. The one is the supply push. The fuel wood supply is declining where the LPG and electricity access is increasing. Then there is several demand factors, including the behavior factors and also the income, kind of the energy ladder factors. Then also there is urbanization factors, where it is not easy to cook with the fuel wood in the urban centers. And the last one is, I think one of the main factors is that the policy factor or the external factors. You mentioned that there are several programs over the last 40 years on clean cooking, and that might have also worked. Whether there is any, kind of, this factor might be working in different countries. It's very difficult to have an aggregate, trend. But still, is there anything we can say which factor is, playing the bigger role compared to the other factors? Can you make, some assessment on that based on the observation you have?
Turn it off. So one thing I've observed in Malawi that I haven't seen in the other places that we've been working in, specifically Zambia and Rwanda, is that the clean cooking sector is organized in Malawi. So they have a regular annual event. It's called the Clean Cooking Camp, and they have a policy day, and then they bring together it's a very, anyone who wants to come can come. So there's usually a couple of academics there, and then there are a whole bunch of implementing partners, government folks come, but they have really deep discussions about strategy, like how do we move things forward. They also have a tracking system, like this number 2 million stoves in Malawi. They actually have them all documented. They have a tracking system for those stoves, so they know what communities they're in. And so I think this like some sort of architecture at the local level within the country is very important. And engaging with that architecture is very important. I've observed a few cases in Malawi where expatriate-led organizations have come in and said, no, like we've got it all figured out and we're gonna do our thing. And things inevitably don't work out for them. So I think that that's really a critical thing. And maybe, Haile, as you're thinking about building these institutions, I think that's something that I've observed is really valuable and works really well in the case of Malawi.
Sorry, I want to ask you one question. It's not really a question, but your experience.
Thank you.
I'm here. So there is you are talking about the transitions to clean energy. How did you experience about the operational cost of individuals, particularly these poor people, when you are moving from this clean to from this unclean to clean? What about operational cost, for example, upfront cost? How did you experience?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. So part of the reason that it's primarily wealthy households that are adopting LPG and these gasifier cook stoves is because the upfront cost is very high. In Rwanda, the cost of getting a gas cylinder and a 2-burner stove is about $200 US. And then you have to, of course, pay every time you require the fuel. What we have found in our studies is that overall fuel expenditures don't significantly change when people adopt those new technologies. So, there's an idea there, which is that if you can get the technology into the household through some sort of subsidy mechanism, then maybe, acknowledging that the costs will be roughly the same as what they are or what they were for you before you adopted that new technology, then I think there's a lot of potential. That being said, in the time that we were working in Rwanda, the price of charcoal doubled. So, it's possible that as the price of some of these biomass fuels continues to go up in urban settings, it's going to make more and more sense. Of course, depending on what the relative cost of the clean fuel is. But for sure, that upfront cost, that upfront fixed cost is the biggest barrier.
Mine is around your experience over the years, vis-a-vis if one wants to push for advocacy for transition to clean energy. Around the globe today, if I take, for example, Nigeria, there is rising gasoline price around the world, LPG, especially SPG, and people are having problem with that. And then the free cooking of with firewood and charcoal is something they can always lay their hands on. We are also talking about the issue of trying to find a way to reduce the emission from these options. So one dilemma I have always been into is what should we actually push for? Going by the increasing LPG and electricity prices around the world, and because each of these cook stoves that we are pushing still use biomass. Is it charcoal, firewood, pellets, and all of them still use biomass to a great extent.
Okay. This is very dramatic. Hello? Hello? Sorry. I think the crux of your question is what is the right thing to do? Yeah, okay. So I have two thoughts. One is that there's no right thing, and part of the problem with the clean cooking sector over the past decade has been that everyone thinks that they know what the right thing is. And I don't believe that. I think we need we should be giving people lots of options, and there's no way that within Uganda or Malawi or Nigeria that, one thing's gonna work for everybody. So that's a first thing. Part of my frustration with the leapfrog dialogue surrounding energy access, this idea that, so there's a very famous epidemiologist who recently passed away. Many of you will know who Kirk Smith is. So he was very, very insistent that it was basically a disservice to give people an improved biomass stove, that we should just skip that altogether and we should get everyone using a clean fuel. That was his very sharp position, argued on the grounds of public health. We shouldn't get everyone using an inferior thing that's maybe a little bit better. We should get everybody using the thing that's the best. I really don't agree with that approach for two reasons. One is that so many people in Africa have access to freely provided wood fuels. So we're not in a strong position to just ask people to stop using something that is provided freely. I mean, it's not free. We all know it's not free. It has a cost, but it has no financial cost. So how can we expect people to go from that situation to paying cash income for a cooking fuel? I think we want to get everybody there, but it's a transition. We can't just go from where we are now to everybody cooking with gas. I'm sure there are some people in the room here who would completely disagree with me, but that's my thinking in African context. I just don't see how we can get from point A to point B. So I would rather see a large number of people using some sort of improved technology, and then let's also at the same time get as many people as we can investing in these clean cooking technologies. Things will happen as that starts to occur. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Let's have 3 more and then we'll close the session.
Okay. Pam, that was a wonderful thought. Thanks so much. I'm here. Thanks so much. Both the content and the style were wonderful. One of the things I appreciated was the very sort of nice mix, academic and practical. So I have a practical question. I'm a little bit fascinated, and I think they're important. These people who get the stoves and then don't use them seems to be a key to understanding something there. And I mean, you mentioned one practical thing is the stove's broken. Well, then of course, that kind of explains it. One thing that just strikes me from being a person who quite often cooks with wood and that kind of thing, is that those stoves look very small, and they usually have sort of a big log or something, and it just doesn't fit in or something. Are there other practical sort of reasons why people don't use them if they're better?
Other practical, so size is definitely a factor that you know, in some places you would need to actually do some processing of the fuel to get it to feed into that small window. So, you know, if we look at our data, very large households don't do a lot of their cooking with these chitetezo, the smaller stove, because it just probably cannot accommodate, for example, the pots that they're cooking with. So that's an opportunity, and we actually have quite a bit of data on preferences, trying to elicit preferences. What is it that you like and what is it that you don't like about these stoves? So we have a lot of potential to dig into those data. If there are any PhD students here, we have a lot of data on that. But this is what the engineers are working on, right? Everyone's trying to but they're trying to come up with one stove that will work for everyone. And that's where I think we're running into trouble, because there's no one size fits all in this universe. So, but you're absolutely right. A key to this is getting the attributes and the preferences for probably the largest group of people, and then trying to figure out how to get the technology to them. Come on, Mark, I figured it out.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. So great talk. I especially like the weaving of the consensus from the literature with the field sites and the field experience, which I think you did really well. I think one question or one sort of puzzle that emerges is this scalability question. And particularly, I think, you know, the one place where maybe your talk underestimates the challenge is in the role of the private sector here, which is going to have to be involved to scale this across the continent, essentially. And so, you know, the Malawi story that's successful really had the government heavily involved with this one implementation NGO, probably. And so, but that model is not really scalable, and sort of the proof of that is essentially what happened with the decline in use rates, which is, you know, not replacing these stoves, right? And that's what a private sector, a vibrant private sector, could do if the incentives were correct. So I think maybe another key policy message is that there needs to be some private government interaction on this problem in a serious way, and regulatory, you know, frameworks for making sure that these carbon cowboys aren't, you know, doing the wrong thing.
Yes, thank you. So I'll just make two clarifications. One is that I didn't intend to like fully bash the private sector. But I'll say also that, so I told you that there are 2 million of these stoves in households in Malawi. The vast majority, like 1.8 million of the, well, 1.5 to 1.8 million of those stoves have gone out through market mechanisms. So they're sold in filling stations and supermarkets and agricultural supply stores. They've also, there have been very successful collaborations with the big tobacco firms. So Alliance One is one of the major global tobacco producers. They have a very big presence in Malawi. And they put those stoves in their like input, you know, their input packages that they get out at the start of the growing season. So there's a lot of innovation, and I would, you know, I would consider that to be sort of public-private partnership. And absolutely, like that's how they got to the 2 million number. It wasn't through this, you know, targeting of ultra-poor households and delivering stoves right into communities. So completely agree with you.
Right.
But I do think we should beware of some of these private sector firms, because, you know, there are these two kind of really egregious examples. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I think my question is on the, you know, the energy transition, especially if you look at how we want households to transition from the use of biomass to, let's say, LPG. We know that the major challenge here is availability, accessibility, price, which is making it quite difficult for, you know, households, especially in the rural area, to transition. But if you look at the transition in the fossil fuel sector, the idea is to de-invest, right, stop the production of fossil fuels. And we know many of these gas, they are, you know, the byproducts of the production of fossil fuels. Many countries, many companies are now de-investing. In Nigeria, Shell is de-investing. In other places too, production has, even in Ghana, production has reduced significantly, all due to, you know, these asset stranding. What are your thoughts in terms of policy inconsistencies? The idea is that you want people to shift towards, using gas. At the same time, you're restricting directly, indirectly the production of, gas, which is already expensive for the people. What are your thoughts in terms of policy inconsistencies with the energy transition, framework? Thank you.
Yeah, so this is where we really need input from, like there are places where people have been thinking a lot about this question. We had a discussion at lunch about like biomass, what did we do, bricks, the rice husk. There are lots of different options for sustainably locally produced biomass fuels. We don't have very many examples of bringing that to scale. I think there are places in Asia where we could look to see where those types of things are scaling. And it's a very logical use for agricultural residues, for forestry, waste material, for invasive species. There are lots of ways that you could envision putting into place a sort of green economy type of production process. I don't think that we've seen that at scale anywhere in African context. And if somebody has, please, I would love to hear more about it. I know of lots of sort of small scale efforts to try and build that type of fuel supply. There are other options, so biogas, there are other technologies, right? There's biogas, which is if you are, I think most people are familiar with biogas systems, so there are places where they are culturally acceptable and really an appropriate way to generate clean energy. There's a lot of experimentation with ethanol fuels, including in Ethiopia and elsewhere on the continent. So there are some other options. This larger normative question about whether we should hold the LPG wave back from Africa because they need to meet a higher standard of pollution mitigation than we ourselves might hold ourselves to, that's a complicated question. And I don't really have I have some thoughts, but I'd rather not air them here. So, yeah.
Thank you, Professor Jagger, for coming this far. I have a simple question, and it relates to the notion that the rich consistently use LPG. And if that is indeed the case, then it does suggest that income dynamics here are pertinent in making the leap forward from the archaic way of cooking to the modern and environmentally friendly way of cooking. If that is the case, therefore, should we then be focusing our efforts on developing technologies that reduce the entry barriers into the modern cooking technologies? Thank you.
I'm not sure I got the question. So the wealthy people, so we find that it's the wealthiest people who are adopting LPG. They're not using it all the time, though. They're actually using it for a fairly small share of their cooking. So, sorry, the last part of your question was?
So the question I'm asking is, you did say that the initial cost is a constraint for the poor to adopt. Now, if that is indeed the case, can we then focus more on reducing the cost of producing the modern technology so that we can have the poor on board as well? Thank you.
Yes, for sure. But what are the constraints to doing that? One way to reduce the cost is to provide subsidies for these kinds of things. There's very mixed evidence on whether that's a good idea or not. I think what we should strive for is making sure that, no one is ever spending more than a particular threshold, not exceeding a particular threshold of their income to achieve energy access, right? That's what we would hope for. So yes, I think it's a great idea to bring down the cost of those clean cooking technologies. Part of the story there is working with governments and getting them to remove the duties and the value-added taxes that are associated with the importation of some of those things, because most countries in the region here don't have the capacity to actually produce those technologies. So everything is imported, and that just adds to the cost. So there's some, policy negotiation to be done in terms of thinking about at least removing that component of the cost of purchasing those goods.
I think we have to close here. The debate is very interesting, but unfortunately we are running short of time. We thank you once again with a big clap. And I think this earns us some good dinner that we shall have this evening. I've been informed that the dinner will be outside this place, at a place of very close to the airport. It is the Uganda Wildlife Center. It has three interesting parts. One part is the lake. We are at the shores of Lake Victoria. So there is also a boat cruise. Then the other part is the wild animals. And then the other third interesting part is where the food will be served. So it's better that we leave as early as possible. The buses will be at the parking yard by 6 p.m. and departure will be 6:20 p.m. Unfortunately, I was just delivering a message that I got from the, so yeah, that is the message I was delivering. Thank you very much and enjoy your evening. Oh, okay.
Is there any program from now? Is there any other program?